With a global pandemic and the world essentially stopping as persons huddled at home, it's difficult to imagine that anything good could have come out of 2020. Yet in the Czech Republic, a 3-year study completed last June, which was studying if dogs like whales, dolphins, and sea turtles have the ability to find their way home. Researchers equipped 27 dogs of 10 different breeds with GPS tracking devices, then released them in an unfamiliar area to the dog. Consistently, every dog was able to find their way home. Theorizing that the dogs could be using the position of the sun, they chose cloudy days with the same results. They also wondered if the dogs were using visual landmarks, so they chose small and large dogs and released them in places the dog had never visited. Still, the dogs found their way home. Studying the GPS data, they found something common and peculiar. Each of the dogs exhibited what the scientists refer to as scouting behavior. Each of the dogs began their journey home with a north-south run that the researchers believe is a way of resetting their internal compass according to the Earth's magnetic axis. And then yet, regardless of which direction home was or how the dog was released, every one of them did the compass run, then headed precisely in the direction of home. Perhaps the tale of two dogs and a cat, as featured in the 1963 and 1993 films Homeward Bound, who lost their human family yet traveled hundreds of miles back to their home to be reunited with their human family, may not be so far stretched at all. You know, it's too bad we humans don't have this ability built in, especially for anyone who's ever had a GPS malfunction or has gotten lost in the wilderness or in the woods of northern Michigan. On the other hand, though we don't have a geographical compass built in, we do seem to have a spiritual guidance system which always leads us to God, just as the men who appear in our gospel reading seem to have a spiritual guidance system that led them to Jesus. At first, this event in the Gospel of John does not strike us as peculiar, but to Philip and to Jesus' other followers, this was extraordinary. At this point in Jesus' ministry, he had only been focusing his ministry in Galilee and in Jerusalem. So far, he had not focused on spreading his ministry outside of Israel. Yet the men who approach them are Greeks. They're foreigners, outsiders. There are a couple of theories as to why these seekers go first to Philip. The text takes the trouble to define Philip as being from Bethsaida in Galilee. It is likely that Philip, from the ethnically diverse region of Galilee and bearing a Greek name himself, spoke Greek. Likewise, Andrew, the disciple Philip next turns to, is the only other one of Jesus' disciples sporting a Greek name, and thus perhaps also speaks the language. Other commentators suggest another explanation for John to have the Greek strangers go through Jesus' disciples first, which is by petitioning the disciples, the fulfillment of Jesus' prayer that others will come to know him through the witness of his disciples is finally revealed to his disciples. After all, nothing revealed the authority Jesus has than that his prayer resulted in Gentiles seeking him. Still, John moves the spotlight of his gospel to the heart of this scene, for his focus is not on the seekers, but on the fact that Jesus welcomed those seekers, which would have initially further perplexed his followers as they believed their reform movement was solely intended for Judaism. Yet to us, Jesus' welcome of these Gentile pilgrims who followed their spiritual guidance system to find Jesus reveals that Jesus' mission was intended for the world beyond Israel. Jesus was going global. But as this portion of the Gospels reveals, it won't be an easy journey. Jesus speaks about losing one's life and even hating one's life in order to follow him. Yet, as grim as his message is, foreshadowing what was to come for his life, suddenly God appears, just as God had appeared at Jesus' baptism, and when later he would be transfigured. God's voice booms out of the heavens. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. Whereas the baptism and transfiguration were private moments, John says everyone heard it and they were bewildered. At this point, Jesus drew his disciples close and confided in them that the time of the world's judgment would come, and they were to prepare for the defeat of the ruler of the world. Unfortunately, the disciples once again misunderstood Jesus' statement to them, thinking Jesus meant he would conquer the world's rulers and he would defeat the ruler of this world, who they viewed as Caesar. They sadly missed that Jesus was referring to himself. Yet, as Easter people, we recognize he was describing himself, something the disciples would later understand after the cross and resurrection, as they realized that even in that evil moment, God was able to transform it for Jesus' glory and ours. Jesus' death and resurrection revealed how much he cared for us, even declaring from the cross that we are forgiven and loved by God. This act of cruelty, as Jesus hung on a cross with outstretched arms, became a symbol of hope for the church, utilizing the image of Jesus with his outstretched arms. This vision and this image extended a blessing to the world while offering an assurance that he will continue to guide us. It was this image of assurance that my grandfather used to drive an old pickup truck with Jesus magnetically attached to the dashboard. I was reminded of that magnetic Jesus with outstretched arms when I was chatting with Reverend Beth Gobelli, one of our former church members, earlier this week. Beth is currently serving as the chief officer chaplain at New York's VA hospital. And she said that she has an hour-and-a-half commute between home and the hospital. And to help her stay focused on prayer, she said she bought a Jesus for her dashboard. She said with his outstretched arms, he safely guides her daily commutes. Being guided by Jesus, we feel a nudge or a pull to draw closer to him. And our spiritual guidance system encourages us to follow him and to receive his embrace. Our spiritual guidance system is similar to the one that led the men in the Gospel of John to Jesus so that they could follow him. It was this spiritual guidance system at work when the shepherd left their sheep in the field and entered the city to find Jesus on the day of his birth. It was this spiritual guidance system that led the Magi to the manger scene. It was a spiritual guidance system that led rabbi and teachers in Israel to gather around the 12-year-old Jesus when he taught in the temple. It was the spiritual guidance system that attracted 12 men to follow Jesus throughout Galilee, to witness his healing power, and to internalize his sermons so that they could write about his life later. Even the wise Pharisee, Nicodemus, followed his spiritual guidance system so he could discover Jesus' teachings about being born again. And Mary followed hers so she could sit at Jesus' feet and learn about the kingdom of God. We experience our own spiritual guidance system as well when we are nudged or pulled from our sad moments to find something joyful in Jesus. It's this guidance system which nudges us to set aside bad habits or harmful substances so we discover the incredible redeeming power of Jesus. And it's this internal system that informs us to replace our worry and our fear with trust and assurance in the peace and love of Christ. Recognizing our spiritual guidance system is active, like the Gentiles, it's up to us to follow where we are led so we discover Jesus. And at the same time, there may be some who follow their spiritual guidance system and end up encountering us. We may respond like the first disciples, perplexed, wondering if these people are truly welcomed by Christ. And thankfully, as the disciples discovered, so we also have an opportunity to discover that everyone is welcomed by Christ. So it becomes our opportunity to point people in the right direction. And while we lead people to Christ, perhaps we'll feel the pull in our own lives to recognize the relationship Jesus offers us. With Holy Week quickly approaching, maybe the plans for Palm Sunday and Easter have already begun an internal desire to move us closer to Jesus, to seek his face and feel his love. Perhaps seeing images of the Easter cross and lilies is causing our spirits to stir, so we seek his outstretched arms, so we allow ourselves to be embraced by his loving spirit. Feeling the pull and nudges of the Easter story, we are moving toward a celebration of world-changing events, where through Jesus, God revealed incredible love for every one of us. Submitting to the internal nudges we experience, we are reminded that God still has plans for the world, big plans, plans that involve us, plans that the world will experience healing and new life. And as we follow our spiritual guidance system into this final week of Lent, may we allow Jesus' embrace to surround us as we go with him into the broken places of life and provide guidance, transformation, and healing, which leads everyone to God. And where we find ourselves led to God's eternal home as we draw closer to Christ.